So we just heard quite a bit from Cisco on their UCS compute platform, unified compute platform. We heard about the hardware, the architecture of it. We also heard about the secure multi-tenancy aspect of it. Who wants to kick things off by just briefly describing what it is that we heard about UCS? I mean, what are the standout features? Let's start with that.
Like
yeah, Simon.
I think it's the reduced cabling, simplicity of management, which looks quite good. For me, the real thing is the real benefit I see of the profiles. The ability that you can assign not only a particular predefined profile to a slot in the blade enclosure, but also to the blade itself. I think that's quite a good feature.
Yeah, the idea that the blades don't have a personality, that you just yeah.
Like a further abstraction from the hardware.
It makes replacing a blade so much easier.
Scalability.
Oh,
what do you think?
It's
I mean,
more scalable. It does.
Ease of scalability.
Or quicker.
Quicker scalability. Okay.
I'm curious about how often we're replacing blades. I mean, it seems like for that to be true, for that to be a common occurrence, you'd have to have a massive data center with, big grid of blades for statistically that to make.
It's not
be
so
a,
much
be a
no,
big
you're missing.
advantage.
No, part of it is about moving a blade from one chassis to another.
Why would you do that?
Why would it?
Why are you doing that?
Maybe you want to tear a rack down.
I install a blade and it lives in that slot.
No.
for
Yeah, but
3
you
years.
want to.
But what
I
I'm
give
saying
you
is
an
it's not just
example.
replacement, it's
The
also
company
about
at this moment we're moving about 10 blades, and it costs us 2 days of nightly swapping around blades because we bought a new blade center.
just
and
because
we
you don't
switched
doesn't mean someone
data
else
center.
doesn't. It's also about if you've got a customer who's got a rack, they might buy 20 blades from you, and the customer decides to upgrade that rack, and then you want to deploy those blades somewhere else, or they buy a second rack, or they want to have motile VMs moving between different areas. There's lots of use cases that you currently don't do because you can't do them. You can't even imagine moving a blade from one chassis to another and then transferring its capabilities with it because you can't. So it's a whole new way of thinking.
Or it's a way of doing an interesting way for doing support, because if you have a blade that has a predictive failure, like the disk light or the CPU light's going saying, hey, I'm about to fail, or it has failed, I have to pull that blade and replace it. I replace it, I don't have to worry about MAC addresses, IP address, worldwide names. I just drop it back down and go. That makes my life a lot easier.
So what about upgrading from a dual core to a quad core?
Absolutely.
Upgrading, you just pull one blade, slot
But
them in.
So this
are
sounds
you
like a pretty good
replacing the whole
feature then.
blade? I mean,
Well,
is an entire blade failing? I mean, usually it's a drive or a memory module or a CPU.
But you still have to pull the blade to look at it. You don't necessarily know when it has an automatic reboot or anything like that. It could be a loose, heat sink for all you know. Until you open it, you don't know if it's going to be a replace of memory or anything.
What I think is my
I have to do this.
takeaway about the great feature of it is the fact that you have an XML document that you can create that has all these parameters that work so well for you. You can move it between blades, or like you said, you can just email it to somebody that you've sent a part to, and the guy slots it in and it works. You don't have to roll a droid out there to fix it. I mean, that's as cool as it gets, So you're not getting billed by any of your droids for support. I mean, that's got to be pretty cool.
You have droids that support your hardware?
I mean,
That's awesome. All right, Simon.
Yeah, so where the real power comes in, I mean, it's for large enterprises in particular, because the same applies to HP and Digital Net. Generally, you have a different department for storage, networking, servers. So every time you're a business department, you want to commission a new server, you have to go through to each of those departments to get something commissioned. So storage guys would do the LUNs, network guys would provision ports, etc. Great thing with this, just slide in blade chassis, you just pre-allocate every slot in the blade enclosure, predefine it on day one, boom, you walk away from it. So you don't need to fully populate the blade day one, but in coming months or days, weeks, whatever, when you slide a new blade in there, you don't need to go around the houses again to get everything provisioned up. It's already done, so reduces the time.
You give them that range. It said, here's the range of my worldwide names giving me access.
Well, you know what they are.
Which would be
each
cool.
slot will have a
Worldwide name?
predefined.
Worldwide port numbers.
Like, you mean with fiber channel?
Fiber channel, they're still
what's
using
fiber
those.
channel?
They're still using that. Fiber channel over Ethernet. So I still have to zone and present. and I can zone and present 50 or 60 of these at once, so I have future growth, I don't have to go back to storage to get that reallocated.
If you're gonna do this, there's no reason to have a reason now. If you got 20 gigs up, and why not do or just do, I said at that point.
You still have to allocate with IQNs.
Steve, are we allowed to jump in here?
Well, I suppose you can jump in if you like.
Just completely different to your question about why FCOE. I mean, one of the things you have to understand is that it is FCOE inside the chassis. That's how UCS works inside the system.
Is it?
Yes.
It's 10 gig everywhere and it's FCOE everywhere. And the beauty of FCOE is that you can run that in conjunction, and I think you were mentioning this, you can run that in conjunction with your existing fabric, your traditional fabric today, using the same management models, using the same kind of mechanisms. If you zone on a traditional MDS, then zoning on zoning in an FCOE initiator is the same thing. They use the same addressing schemes and all of that. They're completely compatible at those layers. So you're just transporting it over a 10 gig Ethernet type instead of a 4 gig or 8 gig optical pipe.
So do you guys find this compelling? A lot of us have heard about other potential connectivity solutions, like, for example, Virtual Connect. Do you find this a compelling alternative to that?
Absolutely.
I think it comes down to price. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but every time I've asked about price to a Cisco person, they start staring at the shoes and start mumbling.
That
if
comes
you buy
back
enough
to
of them,
this.
it's very
Yeah,
cost effective.
let me
So I
talk to
think
that. The answer is that they do it through the resellers.
Yeah, but it comes
Cisco
down
never
to
talks about price.
Yeah, but a
That's
lot of
one
people, I
thing.
think, it come down to is it's got this perception of being like a premium product, which I think that, I think it's a little bit unfair about it. I think perhaps it isn't, but I mean that's the perception out there.
You talking about cost or features?
Cost. Yeah. Because I think a lot of people think this is just sort of high-end stuff, just for banks and enterprises. Which I don't think is necessarily the case at all.
Even in enterprises, we've tested some of that stuff, and it's often misunderstood what the added value is, because a lot of people will look at it and say, cool, it's FCOE, it's Blade, and I got one management framework, and that's it. But you need a while to figure out what it is if you're not that tech savvy. I talked to my boss about it, and he said, what's the added value? I've got Cisco blades, whoop-de-doo. And trying to get that clear is, even for me to try to understand the full picture is not that easy.
Just because it's Cisco doesn't mean
Yes.
that it sells itself.
No.
So another topic that we heard about was secure multi-tenancy, and I wonder if anybody wants to give a brief overview of what that means and what your reaction is to it. Let's start with what it is. Let's start with what it is. What are we talking about here?
It's an availability. It's an availability stack. Stack going from the top to the bottom, end to end, just covering availability QoS, and it covers from virtualization all the way down to the vFiler. The secure part of it right now is that each tenant has their own separate vFiler. It's a virtual filer out of a main filer, but they can only write to their filer.
And what is a tenant in this case?
Tenant would be, it could be anything. I mean, for them it was broken down by quality of service requirements. And on the diagrams we saw, I've heard it's business units. I don't think you could apply it to outside the company. Not right now.
And why is that?
It's an internal entity that you define.
Yeah.
Be it a quality of service requirement, or be it a department that has a certain requirement for example, for quality of service, but
It doesn't cover integrity or confidentiality, so those are the big things if you're talking about different owners of the data.
So, does anyone else have anything to add about secure multi-tenancy?
I think it's semantics. I think getting caught up in narrow definitions of security.
Yeah, as someone who's had more to do with Cisco than most, these white papers start off fairly modest in scope, so they focus on just a narrow thing. For the data center white papers that match this, they're up to version 3.1, and they've been steadily developed over a 5-year period to encompass further and further features. So this tends to be sort of a gentle put there. and see what the reaction is, and then it'll grow up as it matures. And
Oh, I
becomes
fully,
more,
I
so.
fully expect that. I fully, by the time it gets to version 3, I imagine it'll cover everything.
That is true, but if it has the tendency to grow up, do you already want to rely on that in your sense of security?
The feature, the reason is that it also has to not offend anybody. So in grand corporate style, it can't be too clever, it can't be too smart, and it can't take a particular direction or a particular stand until the market's chased its way out. So if they sat and said this is the way to do it, and the market turns orthogonal to that and changes direction, then that white paper looks obsolete. So they need to leave customers and resellers scope to be flexible.
That is true, but if it's a matter of semantics, as Greg said, then they won't reach that point where it gets more granular because
Well,
you
I think
have
you're
no way
going
of
to get that
defining
because
that.
you're going to
Joe.
get customer pushback that's going to say, I need definitions around, and it could lead to the discussion you're talking about, that I need this to be boiled down to your definition of security and not just the silo of who owns the data.
I think the idea of multi-tenancy and security on today's hardware is laughable. You're not going to get it, right?
Agreed.
But the answer is that several of the large carriers believe they can make public clouds on this technology, and their idea of security is to keep it running.
Then you have
Because
the
that's
Cloud Security Alliance is working on that. You have Cloud Audit working on that. Everybody's still working on it. I know forensics people that are working on it. No one has an answer yet.
That's right.
No,
But they are working on it.
They are working on it.
Remember,
but
who's working with Cloud Audit, right?
I am.
Who's leading
for
it?
Hoff.
Cisco. Yeah.
Cisco.
Yeah.
But then the question
Sam.
is the product provided flexible enough to have it adapt to my definition of secure?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's very different. So I work for a nuclear energy company, they've got one definition, but I've also spoken to people who work for GCHQ, which is like the NSA for America, and they've got a whole other definition of security.
The
And
same
yet-
for banks, it's the same for
Yeah,
countries.
but I've done
even.
work for the BBC where there's only one type of security, and that is don't lose anything.
Talk to
Right?
Martin.
That's all security is don't lose it. Don't lose the data and have a backup.
And
The
then
rest
you
of it's like...
So at the end of the day, is any secure thing going to be secure enough to satisfy everyone that you can call it secure? Or is it maybe okay to call it secure even though it's only a subset?
Well, a lot of times don't they rely on standards to be set, and then they use, so if CSA, the Cloud Security Alliance, comes out with XYZ, then when we go and evaluate, we as in independent bloggers, thinkers, whatever, when we go look at these things, we go and look at the vendor's reference architecture to see how closely it meets the NSA's whatever security doc or the Cloud Security Alliance. I think that's usually we wait for those standards to be set. In this, I think NetApp trying to be a thought leader and kind of come out to the foreground and say, hey, we've got what we think it might be out there, but I think a lot of people are just kind of saying, well, we need a lot more than that. And I think in the cloud in general, in these kind of ambiguous terms, a lot of people are looking for a lot more specifics. But until those standards are set, I think we're all going to be unhappy because we're not going to know what the benchmark is.
Well, Cloud Security Alliance already has a benchmark that you can guide some guidance on that, but the rest of the compliance organizations have absolutely nothing. So until they catch up, a lot of people aren't going to even launch into it.
Anybody who's in security knows public clouds aren't secure and probably won't ever be acceptable for any secure requirement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But not everything needs security. I think that's another thing that people forget too, is they want, if money were no object, right, we would all be driving pretty cool cars. But there are other requirements other than the ultimate best of everything. So in many cases, something less than the best is acceptable for one application or another.
It always boils down to good enough.
Yep.
For
It looks like
when you talk about security, everybody says, what is good enough? And right now, good enough barely even scratches in the cloud, at least, like these public clouds that are out there, like the Amazon EC2 and Terramark and everything that uses a vCloud Express. What's good enough barely scratches the surface of being adequate. No, I mean, it's just not good enough, but people are still using it. It's good enough for them.
Well, I think that's probably a good for this UCS roundtable for now, and then we're going to hear some more BCE, and we can have some more time to talk in a few minutes. So thanks, guys.